Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this new GGP-Connect webinar. I'm Anne Gauthier. I'm the director of the GGP, the Generation and Gender Program, and I'm joined here by our liaison officer, our webmaster, Lynn Rouvroy, who is based at NIDI, and we're delighted to welcome two of the team in the UK who has been working really hard on making a GGS in the UK a reality. We had been waiting for that for years, always been very hoping, but this is now happening. So we're delighted to welcome Brienna Perelli-Harris from Southampton University and her colleague Olga Maslovskaya, also from Southampton, survey methodologist. So we look forward to hearing. Now, one thing we'll do differently this time, we're going to offer all of you the possibility of being upgraded to panelists so that you can actually see who is in the room and listening to this webinar. So right now, Lynn is in the process of offering that invitation. If you don't want to be visible on the screen, refuse and stay as attendees. Otherwise, you'll see yourself appearing on the screen, and this will be recorded. So on that, I'd like to pass it back to Brienna and Olga for your presentation. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. So Olga is in control of my screen, so I'm going to have to remember to say next slide. So I'm Brienna Perelli-Harris from the University of Southampton, and I'm the PI on this project to implement the GGS in the UK, and I'm joined by my co-I, Olga Maslovskaya, who will be talking about the methodological experiments that we've done with the GGS. Also, I'd like to mention co-I Anne Barrington and postdoc Grace Cheng, who helped us out with this presentation. And we have another postdoc, Bernice Kwong, who will be joining us in January on the project. So next slide. So we're very happy to announce that we have launched the GGS-II this year, and that it's already been in the field, and we are currently collecting data. So the UK GGS is funded by the UK ESRC, and we worked closely with NatSen, which is a UK survey research agency, to collect the data. The grant has two work packages. One is focusing on methodological development, analyzing data quality, representativeness, incentives, an incentive experiment, and a QR code experiment, which Olga will talk about later. And we have another work package that will analyze the partnership and fertility histories from the UK GGS, but that won't start until the data has been collected and cleaned. We were also able to get an enhancement grant, which allowed us to do a couple of survey innovations, to reprogram the GGS from, well, using Blaze, but into a different format to improve the look and feel, to test different ways of entering dates, and also to construct a summary table. And I'll talk a bit more about these in a minute. And we were able to use cognitive user testing in order to see how well these new innovations worked and whether or not users actually appreciated them. So that's what I'm going to be talking about a lot today. But before I do that, Olga, I'd like to, please, next slide, because I'd like to show you the timeline of the UK GGS. We started the grant in January of 2022, and this is when we started software development and any changes to the questionnaire. We also concluded the contract and worked on ethics, and as many of you know, this takes a lot longer than one would expect. But the programming or the reprogramming of the survey instrument was pretty much finished by June or July, which is when we did some cognitive interviewing on parts of the questionnaire. And then that was finished around August, we programmed and tested the main questionnaire throughout August, which we would call phase 2, which is data collection. And the phase 2 data collection comes in 2 stages. The reason for this is because we wanted to conduct an incentive experiment in stage 1 and then use the results of that experiment in stage 2. So stage 1 started around September and late August, and it continued on through until November, and we collected about half of the data at that time. So around 3,500 responses. Then using that data, we analyzed the incentive experiment and made decisions about the incentives for stage 2. The stage 2 will start right after the Christmas break in January, and that's when we hope to collect the second half of the data. And that includes an experiment on using a QR code versus a link. And then finally, once the data has been collected in probably February, then we'll start the cleaning and weighting, and we hope that the final data will be available for all of you to use in spring of 2023. Next slide. So a bit more about the cognitive user testing, including the sampling and recruitment. It was very small. There were only about 12 respondents. We used quotas to try to reach some sort of targeted numbers in terms of gender, age, and relationship history. We were interested in less digitally confident people, and they were harder to find. We were also interested in people with complex partnership and fertility histories, because we wanted to test out the summary screen, which I'll tell you about, and complicated date entry systems. So during the cognitive interviewing, people were trained or encouraged to think aloud, to talk through their thought process with the interviewer, and then answer various probing questions about their experience with the survey. Next slide. So one of our main aims was to improve the look and feel of the survey instrument itself. While the GGS team did a wonderful job coding it, there were some issues with how it looked on a smartphone and just other ways that it could have been improved. So we took the GGS Blaze code and NatSen reprogrammed it and applied NatSen templates. Again, trying to optimize the layout for the smartphone and improve the survey's look and feel. Then we also implemented hard checks specifically oriented towards the dates throughout the survey, but we tested in the cognitive user testing a couple of key areas. So one of the hard checks was when asking about age or about partnership histories, and we asked them specifically about, the hard check arose when people entered in a month of birth greater than 12. So we just wanted to find out how people responded to these hard checks. Same with the soft check prompts. They were triggered if don't know was selected. If don't know was selected, then a screen would pop up saying that they needed to try to answer, and if not, then to click this OK button before continuing with the don't know. So it's just prompting people to think about their answer and not just answer don't know. But we didn't know if this was going to annoy people, which is why we put it into the cognitive user testing. So next slide. We're also particularly interested in the way people are entering dates. There was some evidence that from the GGP that people dropped off because of the date entry. The format itself from GGP was to have the 2 months, then the slash, then the four numbers for year. And we thought that this was cumbersome and not optimized for smartphones. We also wanted to split up the month and the year so that people could enter don't know for month or year, and perhaps improve recall, especially with respect to year. So if they knew the year, they could put in the year, but if they didn't remember the month, they could say don't know for month. So we tested the following formats. We had the the standard month and year format without a soft prompt and one with a soft prompt as seen in the previous slide. And then we split it up again where they would enter in the year followed by the month. But we found out that the best format was actually written when we had a year with the 4 spaces for year, followed by choosing a predefined month. So Olga, could you, yes. So you can see it here. And this allowed people to, again, choose, don't know if they couldn't remember the year, but then they would scroll through a list of months. And this was seen by the cognitive interview participants as the best format because months often triggered recall when a number would not. So for example, you might remember that you moved in June of 2012, but you might not remember 06-2012. So the month evokes a stronger recollection of the time of the year when something might have happened. Also, people would have had to scroll down to the very bottom to reach the don't know or refuse. And although I was concerned about how easy it would be to scroll through these different months, people didn't have a problem with that at all. I think people are so used to scrolling on their smartphones that having it a bit longer was not an issue at all. Okay, next slide. We did implement a couple of new questions. One of them was specifically oriented towards respondent selection. So Olga will talk a bit more about our sampling strategy and our, how we selected respondents. One of the ways that we selected respondents within households was to ask about their last birthday, the last or the next birthday. And so we tested this question among those living in your household who are between the ages of 18 to 59, including yourself, who had the most recent birthday. We also didn't know whether or not last birthday sounded better. And then this was used for this random selection of the respondent within the household. And the cognitive interview participants had no problems with this question, so we ended up implementing it into our survey. We also introduced a few new questions, such as living in the parental home and leaving the parental home. I'm not going to go into those. And then we also tested a question about working patterns, including shift work, which was adopted from the Swedish questionnaire. We wanted to test how people thought about these different question responses. Next slide. We're also interested in this TriGraph lookup on occupation. We knew that it had some issues, especially if somebody couldn't find their occupation, because it wasn't always very comprehensive and missed some key occupations. So we had this tested, and we found respondents often said that it could be useful, but frustrating if there's no exact match. So while it allows for the standardized occupations to be collected quantitatively, if somebody couldn't find their exact occupation, they could be quite frustrated. So our solution was to include an open text response box where people could put in an additional, put in their occupation if they couldn't find it on the occupational lookup. So if they said don't know, then a box would pop up and people could write in their occupation. Now this is going to be very time consuming subsequently for coding this new occupations or different occupations, but we thought that it was a better solution than having nothing at all. Next slide. And one of the key aims of the enhancement grant was to try to think about how we can collect better data on event histories and the life event section. We know that people drop off during this very intense and cumbersome section. And so we were looking for different ways of collecting this retrospective data. And other surveys have used event history calendars to collect this type of data. And they found that it's a really good prompt for recall of different events in the past. But these life history calendars have primarily been used in face-to-face surveys, sometimes in CATI or maybe on PCs, but never with the type of survey that we have with multiple mobile devices, including smartphones. So in January of 2022, we conducted a workshop on the online collection of different life histories. We invited different participants who had developed online modes of collecting life history. So for example, we invited people from the NSFG who had programmed a contraceptive use calendar. But that contraceptive use calendar, while it showed up on a smartphone, was only for the past 24 months. So it didn't really fit the remit of trying to collect many years of partnership data or fertility data. So we discussed this quite a lot to try to figure out how best to collect this data online. But we were really concerned about the feasibility on smartphones, and we didn't want to do something that was too drastically different from the GGS. So our solution was to introduce a summary table. Now, the idea of the summary table was to remind people about their previous events. We have a summary table in the GGS for fertility, where they ask about the number of children and how many children were adopted or from through ex-partners or through current partners, but not their own stepchildren. But we didn't have a question asking about dates. So working with NatSun, we developed the summary table to be included after the fertility and partnership section with the primary goal of aiding recall. Next slide. So this is what it looked like. It took a long time to program. Unfortunately, it delayed things a little bit, but nonetheless, they came up with this summary table in the end. And the idea was that the respondent could look through, see the different dates, and then amend them if necessary. And so, as you can see, please look at the below summary and check that all the dates are correct. Now, if the dates were out of order, then it could make a mess of people's life history calendar, but nonetheless, it was a start. So the idea was that, of course, they could change anything if necessary. So I can't remember what the next slide is. Yes, here we go. So the cognitive testing participants, unfortunately, didn't think that the tables improved recall dates. And if they did see them, they weren't that willing to amend the dates. They just thought that it was a waste of time. But worse than that, some of our participants really didn't like them, and they raised privacy concerns, which we're not expecting at all. They thought that it was invasive. They didn't like seeing their entire past laid out before them. And one participant even said, "Is Big Brother watching you?" We think that one of the main concerns is that they felt like they didn't want to be giving information about their partners or their ex-partners or their children because they didn't have consent to provide that information. But at baseline, they just didn't like to see their histories laid out. And remember, we were specifically recruiting people with complex partnership histories. And so some of the people had multiple partners or multiple children with multiple partners or stepchildren and so on and so forth. And these are the people that we are most interested in the GGS in collecting data on, because we know that they are underrepresented. So because of these extreme responses, and you can see that one participant said that they would have deleted all their information if they hadn't been with an interviewer. Others actually did drop out of the survey at this point. So this made us very wary of implementing such a summary table into the GGS. And so we've decided not to implement it. We wanted to possibly do some testing on it or further testing, but in the end, we thought that it was just safer not to include it so that nobody would be prompted to drop out because of this summary table. However, we think this is a really important area of research, and we need to find out more about how to collect this event history data in surveys, because we just don't have enough research on how this is done in online surveys. We have more research in face-to-face surveys, but it's a real area of concern, especially for the GGS, because we are so interested in partnership and fertility histories. So in the future, we do want to test this on a larger sample and see what else we can do in order to reassure people that their privacy concerns will be met. Okay, now I'm going to hand it over to Olga.
Thank you very much, Brienna. I'm Olga Maslovskaya, and I'm an associate professor in survey research and social statistics at the University of Southampton. I'm also, as Brienna said, a co-I on the ESRC project, which funds the data collection for GGS in the UK, and I'm leading the methodological work package. So in my part of the presentation, I will briefly talk about challenges which are generally associated with online data collection, but also with a specific focus on the UK context. Then, as Brienna already mentioned, we split our data collection into two parts. So we used responsive survey design. So we have completed the first stage of the data collection, and I'll talk about the results. Obviously, they're all preliminary results for our stage 1 of data collection, and also we'll briefly discuss the results of the incentive experiment which we conducted, and which subsequently helped us to make decision about the incentive structure for the second stage of the data collection. And I'll finish my presentation, my part of the presentation, by talking briefly about our plans for the stage 2 of data collection. So, as Brienna already mentioned, we're using push-to-web approach to data collection, and all data are collected online. And we all know that obviously online data collection, when we use online data collection, there is no interviewer present to guide respondents through the questionnaire. And our questionnaire is quite lengthy. If I remember correctly, we say that it might take approximately 50 minutes, and it's quite complex. So of course, when there is no interviewer present, it creates additional challenges for the respondents. And of course, we were concerned about this. About the UK context, as some of you may know, our main problem in the UK is that we do not have individual level sampling frame. This is a big challenge, obviously, and we use postcode address file, or it's address-based sampling frame. This sampling frame has lots of deadwood, so the ineligible households and things like that. Also, we do not have names of individuals, telephone numbers, or emails of people. And we're also using the sampling frame cannot differentiate those who are 18 to 59-year-olds, which are our target population in the UK. So we use evidence of best practice to maximize the participation. And I'll mention some of the approaches we were using during the stage 1 of the data collection. So the main challenge here is when the households are sent the envelopes, they have on the envelope, it says the occupier or the resident. And the main challenge is to ensure that actually this envelope has been opened. Yeah, so because otherwise there is no way for the participants to take part in our survey. Then after the envelope has been opened, there is another challenge. So we need the respondents or the individuals within these households, they need to select the correct individual who would need to take part in our survey. So within household selection of individuals is the second challenge in the UK context. So, and this can introduce self-selection bias and survey estimates. So there are different approaches which exist. Any two adults are usually advised as good practice in the UK context. However, we decided to select one individual per household and use last birthday method. And the reason for that was that we wanted to preserve the cross-country comparisons and select only one individual within the household. So, of course, we know that literature suggests that there is an evidence of high level of non-compliance with written instructions, resulting in about 20 to 25% of respondents not being the target respondent. So those are the main challenges in the UK context. So yeah, I'm trying to move to the next slide. So now I would like to talk about the data collection. So as I already mentioned, we're using push-to-web approach. So our target population are all UK adults aged 18 to 59 living in private accommodations. So we use stratified random probability selection of addresses in the UK using this PAF sample. And we have two stages of data collection. In the first stage, as already was mentioned, we conducted incentive experiment. And in stage 2, we will be using QR code experiment. And we will see if this approach, QR code approach, would help us to maximize response and participation. So as we do not have individual level sampling frame, our issued sample size was huge. So our achieved sample size, we are hoping to achieve 7,000 individuals in the UK, roughly 3,500 per stage. But in order to achieve this, because the response rate is very, very low, with deadwood and ineligibility rate being nearly 40%, we needed to issue 86,400 envelopes for both stages. So yeah, that's obviously created various challenges, and we were a little bit stuck with the decisions how we can do our incentive experiment, and I'll mention this a little bit later. But as I already mentioned, of course, we were trying to maximize participation and response, and we were using evidence of best practice. So for example, for first set of invitations letter were sent on a Wednesday, then reminder was sent 10 days after mailing one on Friday, and then the second reminder was sent 12 days after mailing two on a Wednesday again. Unfortunately, we're experiencing Royal Mail strike in the UK, and there were issues associated with this, but obviously we were trying to use evidence of the best practice. And I think, yeah, so now I will just briefly talk about our sample composition we managed to achieve in stage one. Of course, we need to bear in mind that this is only half of our sample, because we will have the second stage of the data collection. And currently, the sample composition doesn't look too bad. There are no massive surprises here. So we know that at the moment, we have 63% of female. So obviously, we know that generally online surveys, they overrepresent females. So we were not surprised by this result. We had 87% of white people who were completing the survey, which obviously also reflects the composition of the UK population reasonably well. What we'll need to do, we'll need to look at ethnic minority groups and see how specific ethnic minority groups are doing in our sample, but we'll do it at a later stage when we have all the responses back. 68% of respondents has a partner, and 55% has a partner and they're living together with their partner. 82% live in urban areas and 85% in England. So because we use stratified sampling approach, our countries in the UK are well represented and reflect the structure of the UK overall. 52% of respondents have children, and 53% of our respondents have a bachelor degree or equivalent or higher. Again, when we look at the distribution by age bands, we are not surprised that our younger group of the respondents are slightly underrepresented. So you can see the distribution by age bands on the slide at the bottom. So now I would like to say a couple of words about the incentive experiment. So ideally, we would have wanted to introduce one of the groups with unconditional incentives, but it wasn't possible to use unconditional incentives because our issued sample was so high. So we just simply didn't have budget to do this. Also, we were considering unconditional non-monetary incentive. For example, Office for National Statistics were posting tote bags to the respondents, and the response rate in that group was very, very high. However, again, given that our issued sample was so high, we were not able to introduce this group either. So we ended up having three groups, and we gave conditional incentive of £10, £15, and £20. And then the findings from the incentive experiment, which was conducted in stage one, informed our decisions for the stage two. So in this table, you can see the results of the incentive experiment. We can observe higher response rate in high incentive groups. We can see that probably unsurprisingly, £10 incentive group wasn't doing very, very well in comparison to other groups. And we can see 14 percentage point difference in response rate between incentive group, which used £10 in comparison to £20. So far, we have achieved 3,460 responses. We were hoping for 3,500 responses, but this number is really we're very, very happy with this response. So we nearly hit our target. Then we looked at various variables. We were trying to assess how respondents were perceiving our survey, because we knew that the survey was quite long and potentially quite difficult, but the results of so far were really reassuring. 82% of respondents found the survey not at all difficult, which was really reassuring because we were concerned of the fact that it's quite long and quite tricky. High proportion of respondents felt that the survey was about as long as they expected, nearly 48%, with further 19% felt that the survey was shorter than they expected. Then what was really positive again, that 75% in our stage 1 gave consent to be surveyed in the future. Because of course we are hoping to collect wave 2 data for GGS in the UK, and obviously this result was really reassuring. So they provided their email addresses and we would be able to contact them in the future. If we manage to secure, hopefully we'll manage to secure the funding for the wave 2 of GGS in the UK. 13% said no, and 12% said that they were unsure and would need more information. So then we analyzed our results of an incentive experiment. We didn't find significant differences by groups, except for indices of multiple deprivation. And this indices of multiple deprivation is the official measure of relative deprivation for small areas in the UK. So we know from the literature that people from higher deprivation areas, they're usually underrepresented in our survey, and it was really important for us to understand if we can increase participation from these specific groups. So this variable was significant at 10% level of significance. So what we compared 10% most deprived households against areas against 90% least deprived. And what we found that participants from the 10% most deprived areas were less likely to respond to 10% incentives than it was expected. So as I say, that informed our targeted design for stage 2 of data collection. And we decided to go ahead with providing £20 incentives to those who are in 10% most deprived areas and £15 incentive to the rest of the sample for the stage 2 of the data collection. Our expected response rate is 13.8%. Again, it will be lots of issued letters, which would need to be posted in order for us to achieve 3,500 responses, roughly 3,500 responses in the stage 2 of data collection. And as I already mentioned, in stage 2, we're planning QR codes experiment. And we will try to assess if QR code help improving response rates and non-response bias. What we expect at the moment, probably differential responses by age and by device, which participants would be using. So we're really hoping for the better responses to incentives after Christmas. So we took a decision not to start data collection in December, because obviously it's Christmas break on the way. So the data collection will start on the second stage data collection will start on the 11th of January. And hopefully we will achieve our sample. And yes, hopefully in spring, all the data file will be available for the analysis. And we will be presenting results from different analyses, both methodological and demographic. I think this is everything what I wanted to say. Thank you very much. And those are our contact details. If you have any questions or anything, please email us. And obviously, we're very happy to answer questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to both of you, Brienna and Olga. This was really rich presentation, and I appreciate very much the amount of survey methodology thinking behind it, and of course contribution to the whole GGP as a research infrastructure. So I'd like to turn to the audience. Feel free to raise your hand, and if you want to ask question. And I already see Laurent Toulemont would like to ask a question. Laurent, it's yours.
Hello. So I have so many questions and remarks. So let me start the discussion. So thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. on some points it is very provocative because, for instance, in France, it would have been considered unethical to differentiate the incentives by deprivation area. So it's very funny to see how we are a very narrow-minded view of equality in France. So I was wondering whether you had such issues on, let's say, the ethics of the institutional process. I also have a question about the cost and whether you tried or you had the possibility to have a telephone contact or a telephone reminder in order to avoid people not even opening the envelopes. And then I had one very technical question about the distribution. I think it is an unweighted distribution. So you have so many women, maybe because there are more women living by themselves, or let's say with only one eligible adult. So maybe it would be good to give these proportions with weighting by the mean number of eligible persons. And I have a very provocative question for the end. Did you try to test the standard GGS form? Because it is written in English, so the marginal cost must be very limited. And did you try to offer the standard GGS form to a small part of your sample? Thank you.
I don't know, shall I take some of the, thank you very much for all your questions. Shall I take some of them and then Brienna, probably you'll address others, yeah? So I think differential incentives, it's okay to use them in the UK context. So we didn't have problems with ethic approvals or anything like this. Regarding telephone, unfortunately, that's the main limitation of the sampling frame in the UK. We do not have, we are not able to, we don't know even individuals within households, so we don't have any information about their telephones or their emails. Of course, that would make our life much easier if that would be the case, but unfortunately, that's the main problem and difficulty in the UK context. We have only address-based sampling frame, so we were not able to make any follow-ups or anything. Now for the stage 2, we have email addresses of those who consented, who gave us consent to be contacted for this for the wave 2. So that's the only information we have, and hopefully we will be able to contact people using email addresses. About regarding overrepresentation of females, yes, you're absolutely right. We will do this work once the whole sample is collected, because at this stage it's very preliminary results. So we have only, well, half of our planned sample. So we will do all the analysis of representativeness, and we'll definitely do assessment what the reason why do have so many women. It might be very well that some women live by themselves and in single individual households, or it could be other reasons. And obviously we need to remember that within household selection of individuals also there is another challenge in the UK context. Maybe quite a few households, there is a chance that we didn't get the target individual in the household with the last birthday. So that's another issue. Definitely, it's very, very interesting for myself from the methodological perspective, and we will do all this analysis in the future. Hopefully we'll present it, I don't know, at some point here as well. I don't know, sorry, probably I forgot, did I provocative about using the question, the original question. I think Brienna, maybe you would like to take this question, if that's okay.
Yeah, somebody said, there's a great phrase, I can't remember what it was, that it was written in academish or something like that. It wasn't in standard British English, which is also not the same as standard American English. So we had to work with our British colleagues to make sure that it sounded more informal. So there was some translation of the survey. We did not, I mean, the reason that we did the cognitive interviewing is just to try to better understand some of the date format, and obviously we didn't use the summary table as a result of that cognitive interviewing. So we didn't use the original version, and we did make some changes that were, we dropped some questions, we added some questions, somewhat with Erika's permission to add some questions, especially about ex-partners, changing the wording. I think, Laurent, you also had some slight changes due to the wording of ex-partners versus step. So we did make some changes, and we just didn't feel like the surveys would be comparable within the UK if we use the very original survey. And by the time, and NatSen is willing to collect, store, clean the data, and come up with an output which is standardized with the GGS. So yeah, that's why we didn't use the actual GGP hub main survey.
Brienna, sorry, because I didn't talk a lot about ethics approval, maybe you could mention, because obviously,
yeah, well, I mean, I have to admit, we didn't go into great detail about the incentive experiment. They didn't catch that. They caught a lot of other things. It took us weeks to go through our ethics approval process. It wasn't just Southampton, it was also NatSen. Each ethics board found different issues. NatSen's ethics board was much more concerned about the sensitivity of the questions, especially deceased children. Ours was much more worried about GDPR and various other issues, but they didn't pick up on the incentive experiments at all.
Great, thank you. So I see that I have Letizia, and after that Arike. So Letizia, this is yours.
So thanks a lot for this very interesting presentation and to share your experience. I think it's incredibly useful to hear what happened in all this process. And of course, we, as you said, and as also Laurent has just said, countries are different, so we might have different problems country to country. I was now totally surprised about this translation from English to English, of course, but it makes sense. I want to ask better. I think you already mentioned, but I want to understand if I well understood what is the relationship between your modern questionnaire and wording, the variable you collect, and the standard GGS form. So if you had the freedom to add something, or how do you, in any case, interact with the standard GGS form? And then it was very quick at the end. You said, Olga, that you expect a response rate below 14%. I wanted that you said something more on that. I mean, how do you expect that, and where this number comes from? Thank you.
Shall I start from response rate, and Brienna, then you would, yeah, is that okay? So response rate, if you saw, so obviously it's very challenging. We do not have individual level. Yes, so we have addresses. So path, the file sampling, which we use for sampling frame, contains lots of deadwood, which are, for example, businesses, not only private accommodations. So that's one of the level. Then after that, we need to select only individuals who are 18 to 59. Because obviously address base will contain all the distribution of all adults from 18 up to whatever 100, and yeah. So that's the, and then obviously the challenge is for the respondents to open the envelope, yeah. So for the households to open the envelope, so it's very, very tricky. But as we know from the lots of literature, response rate doesn't necessarily mean high. Low response rate doesn't necessarily mean high non-response bias. So obviously, definitely the work we are planning, the work about representativeness, yes. And obviously we will be calculating weights which are specific to the UK. So I know that there is no plan to, that the hub will be calculating weights which are comparable across all countries, but we'll need to produce specific UK specific weights just due to that our context is quite different from other countries in the GGP in the program. Thank you.
Brienna?
Okay, so I'm going to admit that I went through a process, we went through a process with adjusting the questionnaire, and it was a big learning process. So Anne Barrington and I had heard that we should have a shorter questionnaire, and this was a concern that had been discussed at the GGP. So we went through a process of trying to cut many questions, but then Arike convinced me that this was not a good idea. And so we put most of the questions back, the vast majority of them. And we did try to reharmonize it as best as we could. with the original Blaze code. We did add questions that were UK specific questions. Obviously we had to ask about Brexit. And we did add in some of the Swedish and Norwegian questions because we thought that they were really important, especially about uncertainties and temporary work, the response to unemployment, those types of questions. So there were a few questions that we added in, but it was great working with Erika and her team because they're very patient and understanding as we tried to make changes and then reverted back to the original and worked on it. But honestly, I guess my advice would be, we would have made some changes, and obviously we need to change the question wording, but I think I've been convinced that it doesn't have to be a lot shorter just for survey methods approaches.
Thanks for that, Brienna. Rikke, you would like to ask a question.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. My question is about this soft prompt that you have for when people said don't know to a date question. And then you ask them to think about it again. Can you see from the normal data or from the para data whether people got this prompt? I guess from the para data. Did you already look into it? I'm really curious if this helps. Are you planning to look into it?
We don't have access to the para data yet. Obviously, it will be available once the whole sample is collected. So, and yeah, we definitely have various plans to use para data to assess. Okay,
well, that would be definitely interesting to us to see to which extent it helps. Yeah.
Actually, I don't think we'd actually discussed analyzing specifically how the soft check data went, but I think that we're recording keystroke, key entry, and so we probably could get a lot more information about how people respond and react to the hard and the soft checks.
Great. Another question from the Central Hub, Sion, all yours.
It's Ushan who wants to.
Ushan, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry, no. If you mute.
Yushen, perhaps you could type your question in the Q&A and we could take another one in the meantime. Is that an option?
Good. Let's see. We have, who else would like to ask a question? I see Anne Barrington. Anne, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for the very interesting discussion. I was just reflecting on the sort of length of the questionnaire issue, because it is very interesting that there is this standard orthodoxy about, you know, push to web and smartphone surveys needing to be a maximum of 30 minutes. And I think probably what we'll need to do is we'll have to reflect on the distribution of times that it takes to answer the survey, because obviously if you're a young person living with your parents with few demographic events, it's going to be a very short questionnaire as compared to other people. So I think it'll be really interesting to be looking at the para data in combination with people's sort of life course histories. So just a reflection from today.
But also, yes, thank you, Anne. I think it's really helpful. We also, as I said, we collected information how people perceived the length. So once we have para data, we can compare actually the actual time of completion with how they perceived, was it long or short and things like that. So definitely there is a plan to do that. Yeah.
No, indeed, that's really interesting, but it was in a sense reassuring to see the statistics you present that half thought it was about what they were expecting as duration. That was extremely interesting.
Absolutely, I thought it was really reassuring, because the concern was that it's a long question. Of course, there were now evidence suggests that we shouldn't always stick to 20 minutes or 25, as the previous evidence suggested. There were various experiments, but obviously it was a concern. Yeah. So yeah, the preliminary results are quite reassuring.
Don't know if which one you want to try again, or no, the question is there. May I ask how to calculate the deprived index based on what information? So you had the material deprivation Index, you said, is a standard one.
Yeah, we don't do calculations. So all areas, it's a standard variable which is available by obviously not some. Yeah, and it's a variable which is used for. Yeah, it's a variable which is used for reporting of official statistics across the UK generally. So it wasn't us who were calculating this.
So it's not a survey question. No. It's an attribute of the geographical. Yeah, thank you for the clarification. Good. Let's see. I see that Arike has another question.
Yes, a quick question. So what did you indicate in the invitation letter about the length? This 15 minutes? Because 20% thought it was shorter, which makes sense if there's no like single people without children. For them, it is shorter, of course. So what did you indicate? Or nothing?
Brienna, did we say 50? I thought it was 50 minutes. I wanted to check before the seminar, but I didn't. I thought we said 50 minutes, but obviously we expect that some people will have, yeah.
Yeah, so then of course, I think 20% clearly would have had a shorter interview. So it kind of makes sense, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, it's another good area to examine. Is it might be that we have I doubt it, but it might be that we have people with who are single, have never had any partnerships, and it was a very short questionnaire, or possibly just very standard. I think people who just get married and have a kid or two probably get through the survey relatively quickly too. So, but that is something that we can look at. But again, yes, it was 50 minutes within the letter.
Again, I wonder if it would be good to indicate a range or something, so that some people know that for them that it can be short, because we also calculated this for several groups, and for some groups, I think 20 or 20 minutes, 25 minutes is indeed the length. So,
but I think once we have the par data, then we can actually compare across these two questions and see then because at the moment
and I think there was a reason we had some an experience at one point where they said that the somewhere in the UK, I think it was the GSS or the GHS, that where they said that the survey length was too short, and then people didn't keep, they curtailed their information because they wanted to conform. And is that correct?
I'm not quite sure. There was an example from the General Household Survey, which some of you interested in fertility histories may remember, whereby people were suggesting they were childless in answer to the fertility history question, because for some reason that I've now forgotten, they knew that that would mean that they didn't have to answer any more questions on the children, or to some extent it might have been the interviewer as well. But of course, from the household composition and relationship grid, we knew that these were the children of the people answering it. So, you do have to be very mindful of these things as we know.
Great.
Careful what we put into the letter, because if it's not accurate or if it's too short, then people might break off or not be that happy to continue.
It's a good practice to include this information. So when we designed the letter, it was supposed to fit certain requirements. So it wasn't supposed to be more than 1 page of A4, etc., etc. So, and one of them, the requirement was to actually tell them on average how much it would take them. So they're prepared in a way, because 50 minutes is quite a lot of time. So to ask somebody.
It's an ethics requirement.
Great. Colleagues, this was really nice. I think it to me, it really emphasized how obviously collecting these data is not without its challenge. I think all the teams have been doing an amazing work in trying to make that happen. And it's great to be collecting from month to month all these experiences from the different national teams. It'll be also interesting. We will obviously re-invite you indeed once you start having some methodological results and substantive demographic results. We'll be doing the same also for the other teams that have been participating in the GGP. So on that, I'd like to officially close the webinar. What we will do though is stop the recording now, but leave it open so that if you want to continue interacting and asking a few additional questions, you will have another 10, 15 minutes to do so. But on that, thank you so much to both presenters. Thanks to the audience for participating. And we will see you in the new year. Look for our announcement in the GGP newsletter. Thanks, everybody. Bye.